Yo, 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 good morning. Good morning, Facebook. Good morning. This is the first time that we're going to do Facebook Live for our Periscopes. We normally would do it on Periscope, talking about all things boys, but today we have some requests to do it. Today we have some requests to do a Facebook Live just to kind of grab a bigger audience. So let's try this out, right? Let's try this Facebook Live out. How are we doing this Saturday? How are we doing this Saturday? Just as a background, because I know that this is going to be that this is recorded and it's going to be, on my page. We have this thing called All Boys, all things boys, and we do a broadcast on Saturdays, every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock my time here in Denver, and then people kind of join in and we have this conversation around boys. So this is, the first time that we're going to do it on Facebook Live, just so we can grab some other people, or so that it's that is on the Facebook page as well. So I know this is being recorded, so you can always go back and take a look at this any time. So last week we talked about the fragile male ego, right? We talked about the fragile male ego, in that we're saying that there's this misconception that boys are tough because of the because we're involved in football, a lot of physical sports. There's this bravado, there's this posturing, and the assumption is that boys are tough. But the reality is that boys' brains are more fragile than girls' brains. That's the truth, and there are a number of reasons for that. And because of that, though, males are more susceptible to psychiatric diseases, sociopathic behavior, mental dysfunction. Boys are more susceptible to that. And so, I think I guess I can hear some girl or some lady out there snickering, right, and saying, "Oh, well, I knew that. I knew that." And maybe there's some truth to that. But the fact is that there are some biological reasons why this is true. So I know we talked about one of the reasons why the male ego, the male brain is fragile, because of the overstimulation that happens all the time from video games and other things, and then the under-nurturing emotionally, the under-nurturing of emotional needs. And that females, because female brains are wired in a way that they can handle the overstimulation, because of the nurturing, of the emotional nurturing part. It creates this balance between their heads. Between parts of their brain. So that's really kind of interesting. All right, when you look at how it plays out in everyday life, that's really kind of interesting, because there are some things that ladies can go through, or females can go through, that us as guys say, man, I could never ever do that, or I would never take that, or I would never be a victim of that. So that's because of the way the brains are wired. God really made us different, right? And as soon as we can understand that God made us different, that boys and girls are different for a reason, that I think that relationships will improve. I think that relationships between teachers and students will improve, and I think they will we will get along better, because we understand and grasp the fact that boys and girls are different, right? It's not bad. It's just different. So, because of the less flexibility, right, of boys' brains, boys tend to be susceptible to and more likely to suffer from a learning disability, right, and also academic issues. Now we had this conversation, last week, about boys take relationships break up a lot tougher than girls, right? That they take relationship breakups a lot tougher than girls. And one of the reasons that is because we compartmentalize things. We compartmentalize things, and oftentimes we're operating in one of those compartments. while girls seem to not compartmentalize things, and they're able to operate in ways to where they're using their reasoning part of the brain as well as the emotional part of the brain at the same time. And so, take for instance, when girls, when a relationship breaks up, girls seem to handle it a little better, just because they've already processed this. Way before we find out sometimes. And then, we're not processing it because we're not operating in that compartment. But when it finally hits us, we're operating in that emotional compartment, and that's the only compartment we're working in. So we just continue to feel this, these emotions. It's the same thing that what happens in school. How many times have you been in a classroom, or you were teaching a classroom, and a boy just kind of went off the handle, and then you couldn't calm him down, right? It took a while to calm him down, and it seemed to escalate the more you talk about it. It's because once he gets in that compartment, like he's in that compartment, right? He's in that compartment. There's no leaking over to this compartment from the reasoning compartment. Like we're there, right? We're there. But more than likely, the teacher is a female, and so the female is operating from a biological perspective of, I'm processing both emotionally and also reason-wise. So you're trying to reason with the emotion in the guy, and the guy is strictly an emotional piece, and there's no reasoning happening. There's no reasoning happening. So the best thing to do in that situation is what we do at Sims-Fayola. What we did at Sims-Fayola was we had a little chair outside the classroom, and of course the classroom had huge windows so you can see into the hallway, but we had a little chair out there to where we sit the boy outside in the chair. We can still see him throughout, through the window, and we just said, give you 10 or 15 minutes to calm down. Like it basically, from a biological standpoint, you're giving him 10 or 15 minutes to get out of that compartment. You're giving him 10 or 15 minutes to get out of that compartment. That's what you're doing. And that's smart. That's smart. Once you understand, how many times have you had an issue with a young man, whether it's your kid or whether it's your student? How many times you have an issue with a young man, and then 15, 20 minutes later they come back and they apologize and they say they're sorry, right? Because they've had an opportunity to get out of the emotional part of their brain, and they are sliding back over into the reasoning part to think about what would happen. It's hard for us to operate in two spaces. And I don't care how old you get, it's hard for boys to operate in two spaces at the same time. That's the way God made us. I'm sorry. And maybe that has something to do with, our natural inclination to hunt and be hunters and gatherers for our family and for us. Like when you're out there in battle, there's no time to be dealing with the emotions of what's happening, right? When you're in battle or you're trying to defend your family, there's no time to be dealing with the emotions of what's happening. So you're dealing with the act of what's going on. And so, as I said before, that when you know these truths are not just true for life outside of classroom or life outside of school. These truths are true, period. But we, and that's interesting because we as a society try to compartmentalize these things. We try to say that what happens in real life doesn't matter in school. And then so what happens is that you transfer that thought into school when you're a teacher or a principal, and you all of a sudden try to adopt this pseudo biological perspective. And I say pseudo biological perspective because you try to operate your school strictly off of policy and not common sense. You try to operate strictly off of policy and not common sense, right? Policy will say that if a kid, does this, does that, these are the consequences. But it doesn't say that, it doesn't take into consideration that, if a boy does something and that's because he's biologically wired to do it, that the consequence shouldn't be some just reactive punishment. Like it could be, and it should be, a conversation to try to get out of the emotional compartment of the brain to push back over into the reasoning part of the brain in order to have a conversation, right? Talk about the action and the impact that the action had on others. So still reviewing from last week, we said males have a harder time with recovering from divorce, higher suicide rates, from broken relationships. I know there's this myth out there that boys don't commit suicide. Boys do commit suicide at a larger rate than girls, but it's not publicized as much. It's not sexy, right? We at the Sims-Fayola Foundation, we partner with an organization called the Carson J. Spencer Foundation, which focuses on suicide, mental health, suicide prevention, mental health, and those things. Now, the Carson J. Spencer does a great job internationally. Has an audience all over the world. I'm kind of jealous of Sally. Get to go to Australia all the time and do those things. So, Sally, if you're listening, if you look at this next time you go to Australia, you need to take your boy. But we're partnering with them because their work is on a broad scale. But I'm trying to take this work around mental health for boys and suicide into what? Into the school, into the minority neighborhoods, into the black and brown neighborhoods, because we don't talk about it because it's taboo, right? We're not talking about it because it's taboo. Hold on, guys. I got some people who are trying to get on the Periscope too. What I'm gonna do? I'm on one phone. I'm gonna go Facebook Live, and then on the other phone, I'm gonna go Periscope Live. I'm about to be in two places at one time. Who said you couldn't do that? I'm doing it. Two places at one time, whenever it comes up. And we also said last week that boys are more susceptible to criminal behavior because of the testosterone, right? Because of the testosterone, it lends itself to promote aggressiveness, and a lot of times this aggressiveness is not in line with moral correctness. Right? It's not in line with moral correctness. So you see a boy walk over and snatch a pencil out of a girl's hand or tap somebody on the head or those things. That's that testosterone manifesting itself. And now it doesn't make it right. And it doesn't make, it right to do. And I want to take a minute to say, I don't want you guys to mistake what I'm talking about each week as excuses for boys. It's not excuses for boys. It's knowledge for you to know how to create learning spaces and learning environments that are conducive to boys and that tap into their natural strengths and who they are biologically. That's the point. So this is not, me making excuses for boys at all. So please don't take it that way, right? So those are some of the things that we talked about last week. Is that this fragile male ego, right? So it is not as boys are not as tough as we come off to be, right? But because society thinks that, we treat boys very different. We treat boys different, almost in a way that's non-forgiving. That's non-forgiving of the behaviors of boys. The world wants to package you in these neat packages and for you to sit still and for you to speak when and it's not a reality. It's not a reality. That's where differentiation comes in. It's not a reality. For those of you who've been, in relationships, like every relationship is different from relationship to relationship. People have different dispositions, and boys and girls have to have different. Have different dispositions as well. Now, Anthony, you mentioned something here. I see you said they just have to learn to control their impulse. It takes time and self-discipline. That's interesting because I just read a study that talked about that, and we're going to kind of go into this today. Hold on one second, guys. Let me see something here. There's something going on with this other phone. I don't know. So it's interesting because this study talks about that, and there are people around the country, researchers who scoffed at this thing. But before we move on to this week, are there any testimonials from last week or stories from last week that or for those of you who are just joining now, does this make sense? Type for me. Does this make sense? Do you have sons? Do you have boys that you teach that this makes sense. And we talked about one way to recognize boys' egos being fragile is that boys tend to withdraw. Right, they'll withdraw. The study habits will become bad. Organizational habits become worse. Females will tell you that females are more vocal, and you can tell when a girl's going through something or when their self-esteem is low. But with boys, you can't all the time because we just get silent. We just get silent. All right. So today, let's dig a little deeper into self-esteem. Now, self-esteem issues normally happen in the life of an adolescent teenager in the second decade of their life, from 10 to 20. So from 10 to 20, the self-esteem kind of takes a dive. Does anybody know why? Anybody know why between 10 to 20 self-esteem kind of takes a dive, or that there becomes this grandiose posturing, but more often than not, it takes a dive. Can anybody tell me why, or think they know why that self-esteem takes a dive in the second decade of a kid's life? Well, I'll tell you why. Because of the hormones, right? Most of the hormones start to be produced during that time in kids' life, between 10 and 20. So that's hormones, body changes, so all those things. Actually, good. Now you can see that more often than you can see that more often in girls than you can see in boys, right? Because girls tend to manifest their emotions through verbal action. Through verbal conversations, but also through actions. They start to worry about their looks, start to worry about their bodies, being shaped in different ways. What other girls perceive them to be. So it's really obvious during that 10 to 20 time frame, age 10 to 20, that girls' self-esteem is taking a dive. But with boys, not so much. Not so much with boys. So much so, right? I don't know if you guys remember this. I don't know if you remember, and maybe you can hit the little like button on the screen if you remember this. Remember the take your daughter to work campaign that happened a while ago? Take your daughter to work campaign. So society started to fall into this, or start to believe this fallacy that boys are tougher than girls mentally. I think this is all the way around because of the external toughness. I think the assumption was made that boys are just tougher than girls, right? So and a lot of times the boys we will do a lot of posturing, and I'm gonna talk about that as relates to race a little bit later. But boys start posturing and have this bravado, and the assumption is that boys that have self-esteem is high. The self-esteem of boys is high. Girls don't do it so much, and they exhibit deficiencies in self-esteem more often and more overtly than boys. So much so that the country just started to say, look, let's just have this national campaign of taking girls to work, and let's do all this research. But what happens is they start to pit boys against girls. They start to pit boys against girls, and boys became like the villain. Boys became the villain. Now I'm telling you again. Now, if society thinks boys are the villain and start to pit boys against girls, I already said earlier that this easily transfers into practice in the classroom. Like people forget. They forget when you go in the classroom that this is true. I'm saying that that was research that really talked about that. I'm saying we should have a let's take boys to work day, because boys, we need the same thing. We need the same thing. Now let me talk about this whole race thing. The study talked about. Let me just find some reading here. So that was a study that was done. That was a study that was done by the American Association of University Women back in the mid-90s that was trying to prove that girls needed more help. Which this is also contributed to the Take Girls to Work Day. Now, this is what they said, Angela, and this is where it goes back to your point that researchers scoffed at this and said this is ridiculous, is that the American Association of University Women in 1991 reported that if boys could be taught to calm down and be less aggressive and have less of a sense of entitlement in the classroom, the playground, and at home, then girls' self-esteem would not be destroyed. Ain't that a crock of mess? See, so you're saying, but this is the thought pattern of the country, right? The thought pattern of the country is that, all boys got to do is just sit down, be less aggressive, be less aggressive at home, at work, and at school, and then girls' self-esteem would improve. Now, this is crazy. This is absolutely crazy. But that's the thought pattern. That's the thought pattern that people are listening to. And so the thing is that when the inclination for teachers is that when they go into the classroom and boys are being, less than desirable, it's like, hey, man, sit down, be quiet, be less aggressive, and then with the girls, there's more of a nurturing conversation going on, right? Boys need the same kind of nurturing, need the same kind of love, need the same kind of conversation. But this was crazy. This, I didn't even get this. Now, here's the next thing is that, remember when I said earlier that, self-esteem in the country is equated to posturing. Like the more confident that you project yourself, like the bravado, this compensatory grandiosity, right? The more you show that, the more society thinks that your self-esteem is high. Well, that's more likely to occur in boys. And so there's this misconception that boys' self-esteem, rarely suffers a hit like girls do, because girls will cry outward and show you that something is wrong. Boys won't. We get silent when we're going through things, and you see that in the classrooms as well. Boys get silent. You get a boy who's normally active and engaging and participating in class, then all of a sudden they become silent. Like these are things that you should listen to. These are signs that you should grab hold to, and try to nurture the young man or get him some help. But again, a study. I'm telling you, America is wonderful and crazy at the same time. A study done said that this same group said that black boys do not suffer from self-esteem issues. I'll say it again before I go into the other part. It said black boys do not suffer from self-esteem issues. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that America believed in the mid-90s that black boys, why do you think that this was the conclusion of this study, that black boys do not suffer from self-esteem issues, right? The reason is because America, again, equates grandiosity and posturing to high self-esteem. The study says that black boys have perfected the craft of posturing and compensatory grandiosity. Crazy. That's also racist, I think, a little bit. But that black boys have perfected the craft of posturing, right, and compensatory grandiosity. Sort of like what's this phrase? Peacocking. Yeah, like peacocking. Like boys walk around their chest out and they peacock, right? Peacock. And so they're saying that boys, exactly, I agree with you, Angela, on that. They're saying that black boys compensate for their lack by posturing and grandiosity. Therefore, because you're posturing and you come across as overconfident, you don't have self-esteem issues. So there was enough evidence for America to conclude, or for this study at least, to conclude that black boys don't suffer from self-esteem issues because of the way that we present ourselves. Isn't this crazy? We can all agree that this is crazy, but the truth is, I agree with you, Angela. we can all agree that this is crazy, but the truth is what? The truth is that this is acted out in classrooms as well as life. It's acted out in classrooms as well as life. So it's unfortunate. It's really it's unfortunate, but it's the truth. So there's this mistake made that because of this grandiosity and this posturing that that boys don't suffer, in self-esteem, with self-esteem. So, guys, that's, what I want to do is research. Would you say, Dion? Research truly lending to the voice of boys and men of color. Time to change the narrative. Absolutely, it is definitely time to change the narratives, and that's what schools and organizations like Sims-Fayola and Sims-Fayola Foundation is trying to do. Urban Prep in Chicago. Boys Latin in Philadelphia. Eagle Academy in New York. The Bed-Stuy School for Boys in Bed-Stuy, New York. So, I mean, these are the things that we're trying to do. I want to end with this. All right, I want to end with this piece here. So America said in 1996, Ford magazine said, if there is a crisis in self-esteem, it is not among young women. Girls are doing very well indeed. Boys, in the meantime, are killing themselves and others at a very alarming rate. If either sex is in trouble in our society, it's boys. It's boys. And so people have often asked me in the past, why do you focus on boys? Don't you feel like girls need the same opportunity or the same advocacy? And I said, yes, I do. Girls indeed need the same advocacy that boys need. But the truth is that advocacy for girls is already there. It's already there. Campaigns like Black Women Rock and, take girls to work, school days. And I mean, it's the advocacy for women is already there. And that's the real truth. I mean, that's even that's even shown in the ways or the differences that we celebrate Mother's Day and Father's Day. I mean, the world goes crazy for Mother's Day, and they should. I mean, mothers are a gym. They take the brunt of childbearing and raising the kiddo. But as I said before in one of the other podcasts, is that you can't discount the impact of a father in the lives of a young man. You cannot discount the impact of a father in a young man. Even when the woman tries to, if the relationship ended badly or wasn't, what she or he hoped it would be, even the down talking and the downplaying of the father to the kid backfires because boys inherently want to please their fathers. It's something that's built into us. Whether he's a deadbeat dad, a sucker, or he's the best dad ever, boys want to have the recognition and the approval of their fathers, and you can't take that away. You can't take that away. There's just something in us that's wired to do that. And so even though girls may like I'm a daddy's girl, but they say I'm a daddy's girl, you're a daddy's girl. But the boys want the same affection, but we just don't show it the way that girls do. Again, talking about this compartmentalization, that boys compartmentalize things. Let's see what you say here, Angelin. I don't think girls are doing well at all. I disagree that the advocacy is there for girls of color either. I don't disagree that boys are suffering alarming rates as well. I don't think it has, Seymour, I don't think it has to be either or. Well, I don't know. I disagree with you on that. I disagree. I know that there's more advocacy in the world for girls. And it may not be overt advocacy. It may not be campaigns all the time, but it's definitely subtle in the way that society treats women. Handle women with soft hands, with soft gloves, than it do males. I mean, than it does males. So, just think about what's happening right now with the police violence and all that. I mean, Sandra Bland was a lady who was a victim, but it's way more boys and boys of color too, that are victim of this. I mean, there's this assumption that about the aggressiveness. I mean, I'm telling you that there's this assumption. And it's sad. I mean, even today, I was looking at the news this morning. Another kid just got shot. Another black male unarmed just got shot in Chicago. like yesterday. And the police body cam was like, well, he shot at me. He shot at us, right? He shot at us, right? So, well, we have to agree to disagree on this one, Angela. You know, I'm a guy. I live it, and so I see it. And you're a girl, and you live it from your perspective. But if either sex is in trouble in our society, it's definitely males. There are a lot more single sex female schools than there are for males. It just, there's a difference in the way society handles us, right? So for you teachers out there and people who are leading schools, yeah, self-esteem. Yeah, boys have. So what are you disagreeing with? Are you disagreeing that girls' self-esteem is lower than boys? Like, I'm not sure what you're disagreeing with. I'm just trying to make the case that there's this assumption that boys are tough based on outward physical features and manifestations of bravado and grandiosity, and that we hide our emotions because we compartmentalize them, and also because because we're being taught not to show emotions. And so what happens is that you take that perspective into classroom, into relationships, and you treat guys as if we don't have feelings, or we don't hurt, or you know, things don't bother us, but they do. They manifest themselves in different ways. So as an educator, because you now know this, it's wise for you to say, okay, I know this, so let me be more proactive or probing when guys start to go silent or when their behavior changes, to make sure it's not a self-esteem issue, before I punish them for a behavior issue when it's really a self-esteem issue. So that's what's being said, is that boys are not as tough as you think they are, just because the way our minds are wired. You know, we're not as tough as we think we are. And again, boys have a higher suicide rate than girls, especially after breakups and divorces. Research it. Look it up. Have a higher suicide rate, and oftentimes it comes without any kind of warning at all. Because of the way that boys compartmentalize emotions. And you see it manifested in classrooms too. So the next time that you're in classroom teaching and a boy goes silent, or he starts to, you know, or he doesn't participate, or, you know, his work gets sloppier, or like, talk to him, investigate, and figure out what's going on. When boys go off in classroom or have these emotional outbursts, you know, give them 5 or 10 minutes to calm down, to get out of this emotional compartment and go into the reasoning compartment, because we compartmentalize things and we don't crosstalk as easily as girls do. Which is why there's harsher punishments for boys in schools because of this. People don't understand this. And again, it's not making excuses for boys. It's showing you something. It's teaching you something new so you can do something different. No teacher worth their salt wants to put boys out of class and suspend them and all those things, because if you're a teacher worth your salt, your main goal is to get the kid from A to B educationally, to improve their outcomes, you know, in their communities, and make their dreams look like make their realities look like their dreams. You want them to learn as much as possible so they can impact, so their lives can be as rich as possible. So that's your goal as a teacher. And if that's your goal as a teacher, then you have to take all kinds of steps, to include steps like this in increasing your knowledge about the way boys' brains work, so that you can create experiences that are considerate of the way that boys work. So today's talk was about self-esteem, the male ego. We reviewed last week's about the fragility of boys. And next week we're going to talk a little bit more about bravado, posturing because of traumatic experiences, you know, all those things, right? Again, I hope today was as helpful as last week and the week before and the week before. Again, this is our first time doing a Facebook Live. We normally do it on Periscope. Let's see. Angela saying, I'm saying that black girls are equally in trouble in this country because we have the same stereotypes as black boys projected on us. Black girls are suspended at alarming rates and treated as hostile and aggressive. I think what you're doing is necessary but dangerous to say that black women are any better. Okay. All right. I get it. I get what you're saying. But again, you know, all I'm saying is that boys are treated different. That boys in general, black and black, white, or otherwise, are treated different. There's an assumption that our self-esteem is a lot higher than it actually is. People operate off that assumption. They have actions based on those assumptions. The outcomes because of the actions are less than desirable to educators, which leads boys in general to a crisis. And the crisis comes from the way that people impose sanctions on boys in classrooms and in schools because of their perception of the bravado and the grandiosity that occurs. What that tells me, and what I would get if I'm watching this, is that I need to be more aware of the science and the signs of my young men that are charged to me. That's what this tells me, right? And that the signs in society, the actions that are happening in society, backs that up, right? Things in the news that are splattered in the news are reflective of what's happening in society, and boys are in trouble. Boys are in trouble in the streets. Boys are in trouble in the classrooms. Boys are in trouble, and particularly boys of color, in trouble. Now, this is not to take anything away from the crisis that girls have. It's not. I mean, we all have crises, but it's to sound the alarm for the boys, because I think, and if you did the research, you would see that there are tons of advocacy groups for girls, and probably the most impactful advocacy group for girls is their group of friends. When girls go through things, girls huddle. They huddle and have conversations and soothe each other and call each other. At weird hours of the night, say, "Girl, you okay?" Or "Let's go do this. Let's go get our nails." Like that. That's an advocacy. Yes, black girls do that too. Black girls do that too. That's my most immediate context. So boys don't do that. When we get together with other guys, we may mention that we're going through something. But it's not this, it's not this kumbaya. It's not this huddling. I mean, it's like, it's, "Oh man, you're going to be all right, man." You know what I'm saying? "Oh, you tough. You're going to be all right, man. That really messed up." Like, there's no therapeutic conversations going on. We're not going out getting our shoulders rubbed together, at the massage parlor, or jumping in the hot tub together. Like that's not happening. So that's, I think, the most impactful, advocacy group. That's the most impactful advocacy group, I think, right? And then there are these organizations out there that advocate for girls in a very overt way. I mean, you're more likely to see a commercial on television about advocating for girls and girls' rights than you do for boys. I don't even remember a campaign that talks about advocacy for boys, because, again, this is not even going off on a tangent, because it all ties back into this perception of boys' toughness because of the bravado and because of the physical features of boys. That it's a misconception. That's what I'm saying. It's a misconception. So for those of you who are parents out there of boys, you got to understand that. I'll review real quick and I'll close. Boys compartmentalize. Emotional reasoning. Girls crosstalk a lot better, which is why they can reason why they're being mad at you. Boys take breakups, and I'm not talking about just relationship breakup, like romantic relationships breakup. Let's also say teacher and friendship breakups as well. So if you're in a classroom and you're a teacher, then a disconnect in that relationship affects the boy, especially the boy value the relationship harder than it does the girl sometimes, because we operate, once we get in this emotional compartment in our brain, we're there. And it's hard to come out of it. That's why you give us time to calm down. You can't just keep talking at us. You can't You cannot just keep talking to boys over and over and over again because of the compartmentalization. Give us time to get out of this side and kind of slide over into the reasoning part, and then we'll come back and have a conversation with you again. How many times have you seen boys come back and apologize to you 15, 20 minutes later? Because we got to get out of this side and we got to start thinking about it. So because of the way our brains are wired, and because we compartmentalize in different parts of the brain, there's an increased likelihood or this propensity to overstimulate parts of the brain, which causes boys to be more susceptible to psychiatric diseases and sociopathic behavior and criminal behavior as well, because the testosterone causes guys to be aggressive, and you see it in classrooms too. The shame is that this stuff is not being taught in pre-service teacher programs, because I mean, you go through these pre-service programs for years to learn methods of teaching, but you don't understand the science behind there's a science behind learning, and there's a science behind getting information to people. We don't always operate by it, but there's truly a science. And so I think if teachers had more exposure to this kind of conversation, thank you, Tina. Then I think we can have some better outcomes in the classrooms. I think we can have better outcomes in relationships. And again, I'm not just talking about romantic relationships. I'm talking about relationships between boys and girls in general, because we're very different. Thank you, glad. Thank you, Angelina. But boys are in trouble. Boys are in trouble. So keep reviewing here. Then I'm gonna close out. Yeah. So I guess that's it. Guys. This has been a really good session. You know, there's this old adage that as we teach, we learn. This has kind of, you know, soaked some things deeply into me as well. And if I'm true to myself, I'm definitely being reflective on all this. Just as an individual male. So we'll do this again next week. We're going to talk more about bravado. More about the male self-esteem and the male ego. And again, this is not making excuses for guys. This is helping you to increase your understanding of how boys work. Thank Terrence. It's helping you to increase your understanding of how boys work. Thank you, Tina. So we're gonna go. For those, this is recorded. So for those of you who just joined us, go back, check it out. It's been a great conversation. Have a great Saturday wherever you are in the country, and we'll see you again next week. Peace out. All things boys.